Good morning.
Good morning.
I need the light this morning. It's a little darker now that we've had our time change, it seems, and the season we're getting darker. I'm Charmaine Harper, Pastor Charmaine, here at the Tabor Congregational United Church of Christ. And again, it's an honor to stand before you each week. One of the announcements I have is that I didn't get a chance to mention this last week. There was so much going on. We had a guest speaker. The order of service last week has a picture of the Mount Tabor from the Middle East. And that's the word in Hebrew, Tabor, up in the corner, in case you wondered what that strange little scribble was. And then I repeated that on the order of service for today with a picture on the right. Left is Tabor and Gilead from the Bible. The mount is on the right. So that's what those two bumps are, which in the Middle East are considered very holy ground spiritual sites. I also have one announcement here from the Congregational and UCC Church in Glenwood. And I met the minister yesterday. Cindy, I think, is her name. If you get all the names right, I have the faces. They're having an annual bazaar, and I asked Braxton to hang them. I made copies of this. They're having a soup and song on Sunday, December 2nd, and then a bazaar on Saturday, December 7th, up in Glenwood. If you happen to frequent Glenwood, be a nice community to interact with a bit. So, I met some of the ministers from the other part of the Southwest Association yesterday. Are there any other announcements? Yes?
Don't forget today, the Tabor Library Association is having a chicken and noodle dinner from 11 to 1. And this fundraiser is for the new library. And we are currently courting a foundation to help us pay for the rest of the library, hopefully. They want to see community support and continued community support, so that's one reason for this fundraiser today, is to show them that we are still wanted in the community. And at 1:30, there will be a program done by Joy Johnson-Brown, who is a counselor of sorts and a humorist. She does a very nice program. She sells the Boot Girls, writes the Boot Girl books about the old broads who also TV-12 and assisted living place and solved mysteries. And she's uplifting. Her program will be at 1:30. So if you want to come to the community center for those, that would be great. And then, Robert, do you want to announce about the boys?
Football boys, the team plays this Thursday in Cedar Falls, Iowa at the Dome at 12 noon is when the game will start. It will be on KMA radio. I can't remember whether it's FM or AM.
FM, I think.
FM. So.
Okay. Go Knights. Go Knights.
That's interesting because I graduated from a school back east that was the Northern Knights. Are they blue and gold?
Black and gold.
Black and gold, very close, yes. The Knights. If there's no further announcements, will you please rise and repeat with me the invocation call to worship? Let the ears of all people be attentive. Heavens are telling the glory of God. Everything around us proclaims God's handiwork. Let us bow down and worship our Creator. Day and night, God is at work among us. We are drawn together into one body, the church. As we commune with God, we know we need one another. Let us honor the good to be found in all people. Hear once again the laws and commandments. Find them sure and right and true for all. We weep and mourn for our moments of unfaithfulness. We seek true community in which all are honored. Amen. Please join me in singing our celebration hymn, Come Thou Almighty King, number 267. Please join me in reading the opening prayer. Great Spirit over us all, we come here from all spaces and places to celebrate the amazing gift of your presence. Grant us understanding and fill us with your life-giving energy. Come, blessed God. Amen. We will now have a few moments of fellowship time where we can welcome our friends and neighbors. Okay, please join me in singing as you remain seated. Faith of Our Fathers, 279.
Thank
been a few announcements we made.
Wanted to give a special healing power and strength for my dad, who's in the hospital with 2 broken ankles on top of his cancer, and a little bit for my mom as well.
Thank you for sharing. We list every week some of the people that we would like to pray for during the week, including families that are suffering from illness and loss of power, mobility, health. We continue to hold Catherine Reeves, Sharon's mother, Margaret Madison, Mary Lou's mother, and our members Karen and Barbara, Dr. Rodavaw's son, and Evelyn Hallery, who's in her home right up the street. Hold those in our thoughts and prayers. And as usual, the Weldon family, keep them in your prayers. And the family of Janet Vanetta, Joan Brown,
We need traveling mercies for everyone traveling this week. It's a long ways to Cedar Falls.
I have joy that I have finally completed a boundary training class in Atlantic, Iowa yesterday with other ministers from the Southwest Association, so it was nice to meet some. And I want to thank you all for being such a supportive and validating congregation after hearing some of the things that happen to some of the other ministers in rural communities. One fellow said he was told he didn't stand correctly in the pulpit. There were varying stories and varying degrees, and I thought, and this is a congregation I have been blessed with that will even allow me to crawl out of a car or appear in blue jeans when I needed to get here. So I thank you for being a supportive congregation, because not all ministers have that. So please join me in a pastoral prayer. Dear God, we ask for blessing this week as our country decides important issues of leadership. Depending on the outcome, we ask your guidance for the leaders chosen. We ask that people's emotions remain calm, that you give them insight and guidance into the other humans who are also struggling as we all do. We ask your blessing on the families, the Weldon family, Margaret Madison's family, Barbara Kilpatrick's family, Karen Weatherhead's family, as they deal with degenerative illness, health, changes of living conditions, and struggle with life issues. We ask your blessing on youth who are supporting team activity, trying to build community in their own schools, in their own lives. We ask your blessing on those traveling this week. We ask that the weather support the efforts of farmers at the end of harvest season. We ask for blessings on all of our families. And we ask this in praying to you as your Son Jesus Christ taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive those who debt against us. us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Please join me as you are seated in reading the prayer of confession and assurance. God of all knowledge, source of all truth, we bring ourselves before you as we really are. We do not want to deceive ourselves, and we know we cannot deceive you. Redeem us from human oppression and the lure of distorted values. Open wellsprings of gratitude for your gifts we have taken for granted. Open our hearts to the needy people around us whom we have ignored. Then we can aspire to forgiveness. When we turn to the source of light, God's face shines on us, and we experience the grace by which we live. God is a shield to all who walk in integrity and seek to help themselves, unsustained from competing values of the world. Accept the gifts of God and know you are forgiven. Amen. Our reading today from the Old Testament is Jeremiah chapter 8, verses 20 through 22. The harvest is past, the summer has ended, and we are not saved. Since my people are crushed, I am crushed. I mourn, and horror grips me. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then is there no healing for the wound of my people? We will now have the offering. When we ask that your will be done, our vision is stretched beyond our immediate situation. We are thankful that we can give in Jesus' name. We are grateful that our wealth can ease the hunger of our brothers and sisters. We celebrate the promise that lies beyond the cross. Bless the offering we bring to you. Amen. Please join me in reading the affirmation of faith found in the front cover of our UCC hymnal. We believe in God, the eternal Spirit, Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, and our Father, and to his deeds we testify. He calls the world into being, creates man in his own image, and sets before him the ways of life and death. He seeks in holy love to save all people from aimlessness and sin. He judges men and nations by his righteous will, declared through prophets and apostles. In Jesus Christ, the man of Nazareth, our crucified and risen Lord, he has come to us and shared our common lot, conquering sin and death and reconciling the world to himself. He bestows upon us his Holy Spirit, creating and renewing the Church of Jesus Christ, binding in covenant faithful people of all ages, tongues, and races. He calls us to his church to accept the cost and joy of discipleship, to be his servants in the service of men, to proclaim the gospel to all the world and resist the powers of evil, to share in Christ's baptism and eat at his table, to join him in his passion and victory. He promises to all to trust in forgiveness of sins and fullness of grace, courage in the struggle for justice and peace, his presence in trial and rejoicing, and eternal life in his kingdom which has no end. Blessing and honor, glory and power be unto him. Amen. Our gospel reading is something I picked, which I think illustrates some of the feeling I get from the book Gilead, which is the subject of the message today. This is Luke 12, verses 27 to 32. Consider how the wildflowers grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today, and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink. Do not worry about it. For the pagan world runs after all such things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. As I mentioned last week, I'm kind of buried deeply into the book Gilead. It seems to be a message of hope, and it spoke to me about the deep theology that we all contemplate in our lives, whether we realize it or not. I mentioned it last week as a novel in conjunction with what John Brentnall had presented about the history of this church in relation to Iowa and in relation to the first minister here, John Todd. Gilead is a novel written by Marilyn Robinson. It was published in 2004. It won a 2005 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and a National Book Critic Circle Award. She has only written a handful of books, and they have all been very well received. The entire narrative is a single, continuing, episodic document written on several occasions in a form combining a journal and a memoir. It comprises a fictional autobiography of a character called Reverend John Ames, an elderly Congregational pastor in the small, secluded town of Gilead, Iowa. He knows he's dying of a heart condition. At the beginning of the book, the date is established as 1956, and Ames himself explains that he's writing an account of his life for his 7-year-old son, so the son will have memories of him. The book is an account of the memories and legacy of John Ames as he remembers his experiences of that of his father and grandfather, who were also ministers. He wants to share these with his son. All three men shared the vocational lifestyle and profession as Congregationalist ministers in the town of Gilead, Iowa, in the book. John Ames describes his vocation as giving you a good basic sense of what is being asked of you and also what you might as well ignore, explaining that the vocation is something both hard to fulfill and hard to obtain. He writes that this is one of the most important pieces of wisdom he can ever bestow on his young son. Ames's own father was a Christian pacifist, but the grandfather, who is said to be modeled somewhat on our own Reverend John Todd, was a radical abolitionist who carried out guerrilla actions with John Brown before the American Civil War. This is where it differs. He served as a chaplain with the Union forces in that war and cited his congregation to join up and serve in it. And as Ames says in the book, his grandfather preached his people into the war. The grandfather returned from the war, maimed with the loss of his right eye, in the book. Therefore, he was given the distinction that his right side was holy or sacred in some way, and was his link to communion with God. And he was notorious for a piercing stare with the one eye he had left. It's rather dramatic. The grandfather's other eccentricities are recalled in his youth, the practice of giving all and any of the family's possessions to others, and preaching with a gun tucked in a bloody shirt. The true character and intimate details of the father are revealed in context with anecdotes regarding the grandfather, and mainly in the search for the grave of the grandfather, who took off, left the state, and was buried in an unknown location in Kansas. Now, that doesn't seem to fit with the true historical account, but it made a good novel. One event that is prevalent in the narrator's orations is the memory of receiving communion from his father at the remains of a Baptist church, burned by lightning. Ames is recalling this as an invented memory adapted from his father breaking and sharing an ashy biscuit for lunch. In the course of the novel, it quickly emerges that Ames' first wife, Louisa, died while giving birth to their baby daughter, who also died soon after. Ames reflects on the death of his family as a source of great sorrow for many years, in contrast with special reference to the growing family of the Reverend Bowleton, a local Presbyterian minister and Ames's dear lifelong friend. Many years later, the main character who's writing, John Ames, meets his second wife, Lila, a woman who appeared in church one Pentecost Sunday. Eventually, Ames baptizes Lila, and the relationship develops, culminating in her proposal to him. Now, this novel did not, obviously, take into consideration the boundary training, which I had yesterday, in which ministers have boundaries in interacting with their congregants. It turns out that Jack Boughton, the son of the old Presbyterian minister, is now himself suffering from his forced separation from his own common law wife, an African American from Tennessee. And they have a son. The family are not allowed to live together because of segregationist laws. And the family utterly rejects Jack Boughton. Her family rejects him. It is implied that Jack's understanding with Lila, John Ames's wife, lies in their common sense of tragedy. John Ames gets very concerned that Jack Boughton is spending time with his younger wife, Lila, and his son, to whom he is wedding. She's preparing for the death of her husband, who has given her a sense of security and stability she has never known before. Although there's action in this story, the main impact lies in Ames' theological struggles on a whole series of fronts, with his grandfather's engagement in the Civil War, with his own loneliness through much of his life, with his brother's clear and his father's apparent loss of belief, and with his father's desertion of the town, and with the hardships of people's lives. Ames's struggles are illustrated by numerous quotations from the Bible, from theologians, especially Marilyn Robinson likes Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion. She quotes quite a bit from that. The abstract and theological content of the book is seen through the eyes of Ames, who is presented in a deeply sympathetic manner, and who writes his memoir from a position of serenity, despite his suffering and a knowledge of his own limitations and failings. Throughout the novel, Ames details a reverential awe for the transcendental pathos in the small personal moments of happiness and peace with his wife and son and the small town of Gilead, despite loneliness and sorrow he feels for leaving the world with things undone and unresolved. He is able to revel in the beauty of the world around him and takes the time to appreciate and engage with these very small wonders at the end of his life. In this way, the novel teaches the importance of stepping back and enjoying present realities. Ames marvels in the everyday and commonplace, and he wishes this attitude for his son also. He proclaims his desire for his son to live long and love this poor, perishable world. Ames takes the time to be fully present and very intentional in everything that he does, no matter how small or insignificant it may seem. He sees the allure in both ordinary and mundane as well as the tragic. He begins to express a viewpoint that the purpose of life is to look for things to appreciate and to be thankful for. In the closing pages of the book, Ames learns of the son, Jack Boughton's true situation with his wife and son, and he's able to offer him genuine affection and forgiveness that he's never been able to feel for him before. According to Robinson, the fictional town of Gilead, and Gilead means hill of testimony in the Bible in Genesis 31, verse 21, is based on the real town of Tabor, Iowa, where we are now. Located in the southwest corner of the state and well known for its importance in the abolition movement. Likewise, the character of the narrator's grandfather is loosely based on the real-life story of the Reverend John Todd, a Congregationalist minister from Tabor who was a conductor as they call it, on the Underground Railroad, and who stored weapons, supplies, and ammunition used by the abolitionist John Brown in his invasion of Missouri in 1857 to free a group of slaves, and later, without Todd's knowledge or involvement, in his 1859 raid on the U.S. military arsenal at Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, which I recall reading about because it had the name Harper, which was my family name. And I thought John Brown was black. Now, I grew up with that childhood thought, so I was mistaken. The impact of the book Gilead has been recognized. It's a text that works to correct modern misconceptions regarding John Calvin and Calvinism and Puritans. Former President of the United States, Barack Obama, lists it as a novel that is one of his favorites on his official Facebook profile. I have not gone to check that. I stay out of Facebook pretty much now. But he claims he told Robinson during an interview, "One of my favorite characters in fiction is a pastor in Gilead, Iowa, named John Ames, who is gracious and courtly and a little bit confused about how to reconcile his faith with all the various travails that his family goes through." And I just fell in love with the character. I fell in love with the book. There's a review by a man named Mark O'Connell, and he calls his review "The First Church of Marilyn Robinson." He said, "For Robinson, water, as she describes it in the book, is more than just a metaphor for God. It is itself a divine presence, a form of eminence that creates and sustains life, and sometimes destroys it, and remains mysterious no matter how familiar it might seem to us. One of this writer's, Mark O'Connell's, favorite passages in all of Robinson's work is when Reverend Ames describes of stopping on his way to go to church one morning to watch a young couple walking ahead of him in the street. The sun had come up brilliantly after a heavy rain, and the trees were glistening and very wet. On some impulse, plain exuberance, I suppose, the fellow jumped up and caught hold of a branch, and a storm of luminous water came pouring down on the two of them, and they laughed and took off running, the girl sweeping water off her hair and her dress as if she were a little bit disgusted, but she wasn't. It was a beautiful thing to see, like something from a myth. I don't know why I thought of that now, except perhaps because it is easy to believe in such moments that water was made primarily for blessing and only secondarily for growing vegetables or doing the wash. I wish I had paid more attention to it. My list of regrets may seem unusual, but who can know what they are, really? This is an interesting planet. It deserves all the attention you can give it. The simple, unself-conscious beauty of these sentences are inseparable from and equal to the beauty they describe. With Robinson, one might feel what it must be like to live with a sense of the divine. The writer also claims that Robinson makes him as an atheist, like the reviewer. Well, he's an atheist. And it makes him capable, he claims, of identifying with the sense of a fallen world that is filled with pain and sadness, but also suffused with divine grace. Robinson is a Calvinist, but his spiritual sensibility is richly inclusive and non-dogmatic. There is little talk about sin or damnation in her writing, but a lot about forgiveness and tolerance and kindness. I'm going to make a suggestion that we as a congregation study the book Gilead. Not only is it a beautiful and poetic and well-written novel, but I think that the connection with what we are doing here in this congregation, based with the loosely knit history of John Todd and the town as presented in the book would be an interesting theological study for us. So think about that until the council meeting next week. I would like to open this, maybe with some flyers in town, to anyone who would like to come. I talked about this with Karen Weatherhead, and she said she just had some friends that read the book when it came out, but she couldn't get into it. And I thought, well, perhaps an audio recording or something might stimulate that. There is a commentary that I think ties in pretty well from someone named Matthew Henry. The internet has many biblical commentaries that you can look up, but I've used his before. So in closing, I'd like to say that Jeremiah from the Old Testament reading had many enemies in Judah and Jerusalem that hated and reproached and persecuted him, and in the judgments brought upon them, God reckoned with them for it and pleaded his prophet's cause. Yet he was far from rejoicing in it, so truly did he forgive his enemies and desire that God would forgive them. How small his hopes were. It's Jeremiah chapter 8, verse 22. Is there no balm in Gilead, no medicine proper for a sick and dying kingdom, or community, or church? Is there no physician there, no skilled faithful hand to apply the medicine? He looks upon the case to be deplorable and past relief. Now, talking about Jeremiah, there is no balm in Gilead that can cure the disease of sin, no physician there that can restore the health of a nation quite overrun by such a foreign army as that of the Chaldeans. The desolations made are irreparable, and the disease has presently come to such a height that there is no checking it. That's what Jeremiah leads us to believe. In verse 22, he goes on to say, this could all be understood as laying all the blame of the incurableness of their disease upon themselves, and so the question has to be answered affirmatively. Is there no balm in Gilead? No physician there? Yes. Certainly there is. God is able to help and heal them. There is a sufficiency in him to redress all the grievances. Gilead was a place in their own land, not far off. They had among themselves God's law and his prophets, with the help of which they might have been brought to repentance, and their ruin might have been prevented. They had princes and priests whose business it was to reform the nation and redress their grievances. What could have been done more than had been done for recovery? Why then was not our health and our status restored? Certainly it's not owing to God, but to ourselves. For it was not for want of balm and a physician, but because sometimes people will not admit the application or submit to methods of cure. The physician and the physic are both ready, and the patient might be willful and irregular, might not be tied to rules, but may have to be humored. The patient may not want to listen to others. The blood of Christ is the balm in Gilead. His Spirit is the physician here, both sufficient, all sufficient, so that we might be healed, but we need to accept it. We need to pray, and we need to listen. Amen. Please join me in singing our closing hymn, What a Friend We Have in Jesus, 435.